Good morning to you, who is looking for the winsome. My name is Paula, and I am the guardian of time and history. I'm going to explain you the origins of this land called Spain, but that has many names. But we will feel more comfortable if the light turns on. Spain, this land in the south of Europe, was inhabited from the most remote times. It is what the deposit in Atapuerca tells us. But if we had to explain the history from there, we would need too many books. We will explain what happened in 1100 before Christ approximately. At that time, the Tartessian and Iberian civilizations inhabited the Iberian Peninsula. Trade had developed and the first trade routes were born. The Phoenicians, great navigators coming from the other end of the Mediterranean, arrived to the south coast, and there they established the first city of the European West, Gadir, now known as Cadiz, has been found. But not only new people arrived from the south, but also people from other parts of Europe came from the north, in the European and Celtic cultures. This occurred between the year 1000 and the 1st century before Christ.
In this way, Spain became part of the Europe of the Oppida of first European cities, a concept similar to the Greek polis. It is at this point where we will consider that our history begins. But it was not until the arrival of the Romans in this land that almost all the territory of the peninsula were finally unified. And you want to know something? It was the conquest of Hispania that was responsible for the calendar that we use today. In 154 before Christ, Jera, a Celtiberian city near Calatayud, built a new wall, which was against the pact that had been reached with the Romans. This, trying to prevent it, and in the face of impossibility, declared the war. But one of the consuls elected that year was needed. The consuls were elected on March the 15th, the first day of the years that at time and spring and summer were the best time for war, and there was no time. Therefore, it was decided to advance the beginning of the year until January 1.
Spain, Hispania, at the time became part of the Roman Empire. It was also during this period that the Christianism arrived to what later would be Spain. But always the Roman Empire came to an end, and it was deficient. At that time, the Europe of the German kingdoms also reached Spain. Both the Suebes in the north and the Visigoths in most of the peninsula were installed for several centuries, specifically until the 8th century before Christ. In 711, a new town, the Muslims, came to the peninsula from the south and occupied most of it. At the beginning, the Emirate of Córdoba depended on Damascus, but later became independent and it was transformed into the Emirate of Córdoba.
Tensions also arose, and after the Fitna, the civil war of Córdoba was fragmented into different kingdoms of taifas. From this time, there are a lot of examples of art who had become characteristics of this country.
Since the arrival of the Muslims, the Christians who remained in the north, in the mountains, began a process of about 7 centuries to recover the territories of the peninsula. The process, favored by the taifas, own internal tensions, reduced the emergence of different Christian kingdoms, while the Muslims were confined to the southern territories of the peninsula. The last Muslim kingdom of Grenada was conquered in 1492 by Isabella of Castile and Ferdinand of Aragon, husband and wife.
We are already in the 15th century, and several countries have already achieved areas of influence in different countries of Africa and Asia in search of different products. At this time, Christopher Columbus, sponsored by the Crown of Castile, arrived in America while looking for a new road to the Indies. This point is the beginning of a series of conquests of different lands by Spain. All these territories would finally become independent at the end of the 19th century.
But we are going to continue our history in a linear way. We arrived to the 16th century. At that moment, Charles I, grandson of Isabella and Ferdinand, inherited the kingdoms of Castile and Aragon, the lands in America, but also from his father's side. He became Emperor of the Holy Roman Empire. At that point, the Spanish Empire is born and Spain becomes First World Power. Charles I was the first of the Austrians to govern this empire up to the death of Charles II. This period represents the Golden Age in Spain. But after the death without issue of Charles II, a war was declared to find the next king of Spain. The war was won by Philip V, Charles' grandnephew. It was this way that the Bourbons, the French royal dynasty, arrived to the Spanish throne. But not only the Bourbons, but also the Illustration ideas arrived and spread in Spain with them.
But history always repeats, and after some years, as a reflex of the European revolutions in the 19th century, these years are known to be a very convulsive period. After the Independence War, trying to defend from Napoleon, the first Spanish constitution was signed, but abolished after the return of the Bourbons. Different revolutions emerged from that moment, ending with the proclamation of the First Spanish Republic. But at the end of the century, the Bourbon dynasty came back again. At the end of the century, the last Spanish colonies in America declared independence. We arrived to the beginning of the 20th century. Since 1923 in Spain, there was a confrontation between democracy and totalitarianism.
The Civil War, prelude of the Second World War, from 1936 to 1939, led to the period called Francoism, considered to be ended in 1978. Finally, in 1986, Spain consolidated itself as a democratic country and became part of the European Union. This last opening to Europe represents its present and future. So far, I can tell you your man annexes to none, but realize that this book has many pages to write. From now on, the protagonist is you.